Imagine this. You're sailing on a luxurious cruise ship right in the middle of the ocean. Endless blue water in every direction, perfect weather. But then, one night, everything flips. The compass needles go haywire, your radio signal dies. You send out an SOS, but instead of a Coast Guard voice, what comes back is the horrifying sound of thousands of people screaming and crying. This isn't just another story. It's a real, terrifying tale of survival. A fight against death itself that still gives scientists chills today. A ship that vanished into the ocean. But when it returned 9 months later, it completely changed our understanding of science and time. Hold your breath, because this journey will make your hair stand on end. The year was 1994. The Atlantic Star Corporation, one of America's biggest and most famous shipping companies, decided to launch its most advanced, most luxurious passenger ship. The name of this massive vessel was the MS Oceanic Glory. It was called an engineering marvel of its time, considered even safer than the Titanic. The morning of November 13th was a Friday, considered very unlucky and ominous by sailors, especially in the West. But drunk on science and technology, the company didn't care about old superstitions. The ship was ready to leave New York Harbor for England on its first and most important voyage. On board were 400 people, 150 highly professional and skilled crew members, and 250 VIP passengers who had come to enjoy the trip of a lifetime. Command of the entire ship was given to Captain Arthur Black. Captain Black was no ordinary man. He had 35 years of experience at sea, but even more than experience, he was filled with pride. Just before the voyage began, he laughed and told the media cameras, "No storm in the world, not even if God himself sends it, can sink my ship." With him were First Officer David Carter and Chief Engineer Thomas Vann. The first 3 days were absolutely perfect. The sea was as calm as glass. The ship was moving at full speed, 24 knots, toward its destination. Grand parties were held every night in the dining hall. People were drinking champagne and enjoying life, but those laughing passengers on deck had no idea that something terrifying was waiting for them beneath that calm, deep blue water. The fourth day of the journey had begun. It was 2:15 a.m. The silence at sea at night is often strange, but tonight it was deeper and more piercing than usual. First Officer David Carter was on his night shift in the control room bridge. He had just picked up his coffee cup and turned toward the radar screen when the cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. What he saw on the radar screen was enough to freeze anyone's mind. The radar showed something enormous floating deep in the ocean, directly beneath the ship and very close. It wasn't a whale or a submarine. It was many times bigger than their already huge ship. David's heart pounded like a drum. He looked away from the radar and ran to the large window on the bridge, peering out at the ocean. But outside was total darkness. No moon, no stars. The sea looked like black ink. He couldn't see a thing. David immediately alerted his junior and picked up the intercom to wake Captain Black. But just then, the temperature inside the ship suddenly began to drop rapidly. The sea, which had been perfectly calm moments before, now felt strangely suffocating. Crew members felt as if an invisible force was constantly staring at them. That thing swimming underwater had changed direction and was now moving parallel to the ship. David knew something terrible was about to happen, but he couldn't do anything about it, no matter how hard he tried. This was the moment when the lives of all 400 people on board were about to turn forever onto a path from which there was no return. Exactly at 3 a.m., something happened that shook everyone to their core. All the navigation systems and compasses on the control panel suddenly went crazy. Their needles spun in wild, fast circles, as if Earth's magnetic field had stopped working. Within 1 second, the GPS screen shut down with a violent jolt. When it came back on, there was no map, just strange red coding and the words, "No signal," in big letters. As the clock struck 3:15, the ship lost all contact with the outside world. They were completely alone in the middle of the ocean. Captain Black came running into the control room. His pride had turned into pale fear on his face. Without wasting a second, he ordered the radio operator to broadcast an SOS immediately. The operator, hands trembling, set the emergency frequency and cried out for help. But the voice that came back over the radio made everyone's blood run cold. It wasn't a Coast Guard or Navy officer. From the radio speakers came the terrifying sounds of many people crying at once, writhing in pain and whispering in very eerie voices. It seemed as if those voices were coming from the very depths of the ocean floor. Captain Black immediately ordered the engines reversed, but by then it was far too late. The ship was already caught in an unknown and incredibly powerful magnetic field that had pulled it far off its original route. They were no longer where they should have been in the Atlantic. Instead, Instead, they were being dragged into a forgotten, cursed part of the Bermuda Triangle, a place from which no one who had ever entered had returned alive to tell the story. Then a thick, glowing green radioactive fog rose from the ocean's surface and swallowed the entire ship. The fog was so dense that you couldn't see your own family member standing 3 feet away. Panic erupted in the passengers' cabins. In that terrifying darkness, some people looked out their windows and saw a huge blue-green light slowly swimming in the dark depths directly beneath the ship. Then, from the lower deck, came the sounds of heavy metal scraping and people screaming loudly. Running through the corridors, people began seeing tall, faceless black shadows moving alongside them in the fog. Fear, suffocation, and that strange whispering from the radio destroyed people's minds so completely that they refused to even recognize each other. Within just 3 days, all 1,120 people on board had completely lost their sanity. The atmosphere of horror grew even deeper when the first disappearance was reported. Third engineer Marcus had gone to the engine room to check a fuel pump. He never returned. The crew searched everywhere. 3 days later, their attention was drawn to a heavy iron box in the darkest corner of the boiler room. The box was locked from the inside. When they cut it open with a gas torch, the sight inside made 2 people vomit on the spot. Marcus's body wasn't there, just his blood-soaked clothes and his shoes. His entire body, bones, flesh, everything had vanished. No one knew where. All the food supplies stored for months in the large storeroom rotted within. Just a few hours. Thick maggots infested it, and a stench spread throughout the ship. But the chilling, hair-raising part was that the raw meat kept in that same storeroom was perfectly fresh, still dripping blood. Driven by hunger and fear, people began having strange hallucinations. A bloody, animalistic fight for survival had begun among the humans just to stay alive. While passengers were still struggling with hunger and madness, a powerful, terrifying impact struck the ship from beneath. It wasn't a rock. The people on board felt as if some gigantic, invisible hand had grabbed the ship from below in its claws. The entire ship lurched violently, tilting 30 degrees to one side. Tables, chairs, and people slid and crashed into walls. The impact tore open the iron plating on the lower deck, creating a large hole. The freezing, black, terrifying water outside rushed quickly into the rooms. People were screaming, swimming for their lives as water filled the cabins. Breath was running out, and their bodies were turning blue from the cold. Chief Engineer Van ran and started the massive emergency pumps. The machines roared with full force, but within minutes, all those pumps exploded with a loud blast. And when they exploded, instead of salty seawater, a thick, foul-smelling liquid mixed with blood began gushing out like fountains. The entire engine room flooded with blood. The crew members' courage completely broke. The water kept rising, and along with it, the sounds of people drowning and gasping echoed throughout the ship. Everyone was praying just to survive the night, but even God seemed unable to hear their voices in that cursed fog. All of Captain Arthur Black's pride, which he had shown on camera before the voyage, had washed away in his tears. He was on his knees, trembling. When he realized the ship would sink into the ocean's grave within a few hours, he sounded the alarm with a heavy heart and gave the final order to abandon ship. But by then, it was far too late. The animal inside humans had awakened. The crew mutinied to save themselves instead of the passengers. First Officer David Carter, whose eyes now held only the madness of survival, pulled out his loaded service revolver and pointed it directly at Captain Black's head. He snatched the master keys to the lifeboats from the captain. On the upper deck, where the lifeboats were stored, death was dancing wildly. There were 400 people and only a few boats. Everyone wanted to jump into a boat first. In the pushing, shoving, fighting, and chaos, many lifeboats' ropes broke, and they crashed into the rough waves, shattering into pieces. People were crushing each other to get ahead. Blood was flowing on the deck, making their feet slip. Somehow, only 2 lifeboats were successfully lowered into the water, carrying about 60 desperate people begging for their lives. David Carter cut the rope, and those 60 people escaped into the thick green fog, bobbing on the waves. But left behind on the sinking, screaming, cursed ship were 340. People, including women and children, left to wait for death. Their cries slowly buried themselves in that fog. Captain Black watched the lifeboats leave and went back to his cabin. He opened his logbook and, with trembling hands, wrote his last line, "God forgive us all. My mistake killed everyone. Time has completely stopped here. We are standing at the gates of hell, and I can hear their voices. They are coming for us." With that, he closed his eyes. But the real horror of this story was tied to those 60 people who fled in the lifeboat. They fought the waves in that freezing ocean all night. night. When the next morning came, the green fog thinned slightly, and the first ray of sunlight emerged. What they saw stopped their hearts. They hadn't gone anywhere. Despite rowing all night, they had just been circling their own massive ship inside that fog, trapped in an infinite loop with no way out. The next morning, when the sun rose for the rest of the world, the ocean was completely empty. No green fog, no storm. But the Oceanic Glory had vanished without a trace from the ocean's surface. Panic spread across America. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard spent 3 full months searching every inch of the ocean with their most advanced helicopters and ships. But they found only blue water. No wreckage, no bodies, no oil spill. Just one broken, half-burned life jacket with Oceanic Glory written on it. The whole world accepted that the ship had sunk forever into the depths, along with its 400 passengers. Grieving families on shore even held funerals for their loved ones. But the real climax and suspense of this story was just beginning. Exactly 9 months after this incident, the world had moved on. In August 1995, on a dark, silent night, a sudden beep appeared on the Coast Guard's radar off the coast of Miami. A very heavy signal was coming toward them from the ocean. When the rescue team reached that location in their boats and their searchlights, hit the object ahead, every officer's knees buckled. Standing before them was the Oceanic Glory. The rescue team, guns and flashlights in hand, entered the ship with pounding hearts. Inside, they found 150 half-dead, insane survivors huddled in the cold storage room. Among them was David Carter, who screamed that only 3 weeks had passed for him. Doctors confirmed his biological clock showed 3 weeks, not 9 months. 5 years later, in 2000, Captain Arthur Black was found alive in an English mental asylum. How he got there remains a mystery. The U.S. government sealed the files, calling it bad weather. The place was named the Devil's Eye. Even today, science has no answer. Was it another dimension, time travel, or nature's terrifying secret? This is where the story ends. But the ocean keeps its secrets, and somewhere out there, the Devil's Eye is still open. Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story made your hair stand on end, like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. See you in the next terrifying tale.